finally we reached this point where both are big enough, important enough to matter, and important political voices on both sides are expressing their frustration, or at least the frustration of some of the citizenry there. And ultimately, we're left with now what is, I would contend, a fairly heavy-handed set of policies that are being implemented, but nonetheless reflecting legitimate and inevitable confrontation that I think was going to take place between these countries, no matter what.
There are two parts to it, right? So one is, do you diagnose the problem correctly? And the second is, do you have the right medicine for the problem, right? So in this case, I think the current administration has been able to diagnose the problem correctly. Yes, there were certain issues. There were certain unfair trade practices that some countries had adopted, including China. But the medicine that is being used to solve that, to take care of that disease is probably not right.
It feels very much like trying to toss the baby out with the bathwater approach, where you're threatening very harsh action to rip up entire agreements, and then when things get resolved, it tends to be the more surgical precision carve-outs around the edges, which I think is an interesting approach, a bit more of a risky approach than I personally would be comfortable with, because it does create a lot of uncertainty in the players who have to interact with those markets.
And so on the one hand, there's been this almost unprecedented in the history of mankind, frankly, transformation of a society in a very, very fast way, and it's staggering and actually pretty hopeful. But with it also has come a kind of institutional structure which is not built for the next step, and so then navigating the next step to high income is going to involve some tough reallocation of resources, some tough institutional shifts. And I think even absent any of the trade disputes, that is sort of the defining challenge for China over the next 20 years, is to figure that out, or they run the risk of getting stuck in what has notoriously been called the middle income trap.
Heightened trade tensions between China and the United States has resulted in significant slowdown, right, in many areas, particularly related to technology. But we actually advise some of our clients maybe to look into more greenfield investment, maybe for Chinese companies when they come to United States in future, they need to really act and behave more like local companies. So that actually is result in acceleration of company behaviors.
The biggest impact to us has been just manufacturing products within countries and shipping them across borders. Obviously, the uncertainty and added costs that tariffs have brought do have an impact, but seeing them actually play out and what's really going to come to light within the markets themselves and what's going to be made, I guess, official with bills still remains to be seen.
And when we think about sourcing for our products, we tend to source from best source countries around the world. So no matter where our manufacturing locations are, we'll source wherever we can find the most reliable product at the most competitive price. And then on the ultimate end sales, having customers in over 19 countries around the world, obviously a global view and global trade is very important to us. So it impacts us both on the supply side and on our customer side.
Manufacturers can intervene and sort of say, hey, we may want to make sure that our consumers do not notice anything going on. That means that they would have to cut their margins. That is something that they may try to do in the shorter time, but if this is a very long and very trade war that's going to be sustained, that is something that they will not be able to do, because then they will just bleed. So given that it looks as that the trade war may last for a longer time, prices are expected to increase, and then the question is, what do you do with your consumers?
The free flow of those products and the ability to compete in a world with a lack of tariffs and the free flow of goods is vitally important to our business, and having a level playing field so that we can think of our company as one global player really is the best way that we think we can conduct business around the world.
As important as that is for any one individual business leader or resource allocator, if we're talking about 10 or 25% of $500 billion of goods, that's a big number, but We live in a $20 trillion United States economy. We live in a $70, $80 trillion global economy. This is still relatively small potatoes. The danger is what happens next. So does this then create a kind of cascade effect of multiple rounds of tariffs? Does this spill over into our relationships in the rest of Southeast Asia or in Europe or Latin America? What kind of things does China do to retaliate, and does that sort of more significantly affect global business?
I think that most businesses at this point in time are a bit hesitant and probably are waiting for major investments, so it may be slowing down a bit. So they're all trying to see what's going to happen over the next couple of months, and then once again, most of them are just keeping their fingers crossed and hoping that, one, the trade war will not escalate and that there may be some sort of solution for the Brexit situation.
I think it's fair to say that China has significant work to do in the openness of its market, protection of certain kinds of intellectual property, friendliness to foreign investors, corruption perception, all these sorts of things. This is legitimate work that China has to do, and it is entirely appropriate for external trade representatives to push them hard to make improvements along those dimensions. And indeed, those are exactly the kinds of improvements that will be required for China to eventually reach its aspirations anyway. Moving from middle income to high income is impossible without those kinds of institutional improvements, because the allocation of resources are all wrong in the absence of that kind of evolution.
Pressure could be applied to China simply by critiquing it at the UN and globally, and for the U.S. to be a leader about what does it mean to be free market and human rights, etc., and embarrass China. And China does respond to that. As soon as you declare war on China, which we've done as a trade war, it puts the Chinese government very much on the defense. And people in China are as patriotic as Americans, and they start to think, well, why does the U.S. not like us? Why are they trying to hurt us economically? And that doesn't, I think, motivate China.
I think now what China has to do is to really make the market more open. An adjustment also has to be done by the United States, because when China opened up, China's economy was a fraction of, for example, state of California. Now China is 70% of U.S. economy. So really adjustment has to be made by both sides. I think the best way to describe this relationship going forward perhaps is cooperative rivalry.
In some sense, I would say let's stop what we're doing, maybe sort of go back to the drawing board and understand what our objectives are. And then I think it would be appropriate for us to instead engage with our friends around the world. And we have friends in Europe, we have friends in this continent, we have friends in Southeast Asia that are desperately looking for American leadership because they're worried about the ascension of China and its dominance in that region. Engage with those friends and say, let's come together as a force to kind of push China to make the improvements along this institutional dimension, and then ultimately say, look, this is how you want to join into the global landscape of economic activity. These are the necessary steps, and then those will only benefit us, and that will only benefit them. I think that's the right way to do it, but again, that's not particularly politically palatable right now here at home, because it involves engaging with our friends, engaging with our global alliances and such to try to push this, and that seems to be not the direction that we're headed at present.